So welcome everyone to the first lesson of animation and graphic design from Team 8. So my name is Shohan. I'm a member of Team 8 and I am on art team. And here are some of the other team members.
My name is Amy. I'm the team co-captain for this coming year, and I also came from art.
Hi, I'm Selena. I'm the art.
On the art sub-team of Paly Robotics.
Hi, I'm Madeline or Max, and I'm also on the art team.
Hi, I'm Nicholas. I'm not on the art team, I'm on business, but I'm happy to be here.
Hi, I'm Caroline. I'm also on business. Yeah, and we're really glad that you guys are joining us today.
Yeah, so is there anybody who wants to start with introductions? You can just say your name, grade, and favorite ice cream.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Eden. I'm going to 8th grade, and my favorite ice cream is mint chip.
Good choice.
My name is Sanvi. I'm going to 8th grade, and I also like mint chip.
My name is Riley, and I'm going into 9th grade, and my favorite ice cream is just vanilla.
Hi, my name's Giselle. I'm going into 7th grade, and I don't have a favorite ice cream.
My name is Corey, and I'm in 5th grade, and my favorite ice cream is bubblegum.
My name is Ashton, and I'm going into 8th grade. My favorite ice cream flavor is chocolate.
My name is Brooklyn. I'm going into 6th, and my favorite ice cream is either strawberry or cookie dough.
My name's Naomi. I'm going into 9th, and my favorite ice cream is chocolate.
My name's Akash. I'm going into 7th, and my favorite ice cream is vanilla.
My name is Kyle. Oh, sorry, you can go.
My name is Alexander, and I'm going to 7th grade, and my favorite ice cream is cookie dough.
My name is Kyle. I'm going to 9th grade, and my favorite ice cream is vanilla.
My name is Maya, and I'm going to 7th grade, and my favorite ice cream is vanilla.
My name is Jordan. I am going to be a 9th grader, and my favorite ice cream flavor is cookies and cream.
Cool. I guess I am assuming that was mostly everyone who wanted to introduce themselves. So again, welcome. Some things before we start would just be to make sure to be respectful when you're talking on Zoom, whether it be to the other people in the lesson or to the counselors who are here to teach today. And don't say anything you wouldn't say in school. And yeah, have fun with it. All right, so we're gonna get started. Today we're gonna be going over some graphic design concepts. And first up, we will be talking about fonts.
Okay, so you can see a lot of fonts on the screen. Then the next slide will be introduced to the different types of fonts. And on the first one is serif. So serif is has font. Let me find some pointer annotating things. Are those possible? Okay. Well, they have the little feet. Thank you. They have the little feet with on each like letter. And that's a very traditional, very like essay, very formal type of typography. There's always sans serif, which is like Arial, which is like the default font for anything in Google basically, and it doesn't have that the little feet, hence the sans serif, which is like sans is without in French, so without feet. And then they have script, which is kind of like cursive or handwriting type script or typography. And then we have decorative, which can honestly be anything. It just doesn't really fit in the 3 boxes above it. On the next slide, would anyone like to volunteer for what type of font the first formal is? Go ahead, Aiden. Or yeah, go ahead, Aiden.
Okay, so the first one is serif, I think.
Yes.
The second one is, it could be, I mean, sure, sans serif, maybe?
Yes, it is sans serif. Yeah.
I mean, it has to be decorative. And the last one is Comic Sans, and I don't know what the middle one is.
So the middle one is kind of, I guess you could say it is kind of in between, but I would honestly say it's sans serif because it doesn't have that classic little feet. And then let's move on to the next slide. Okay, does anyone recognize the font in all of these logos?
Yes.
Alexander, what is the font?
Oh shoot, the font? Oh, I thought it was the pictures.
Oh, that's okay. Do you want to guess what type, what like type it is?
Is it the sans serif?
Yeah, I would say it's sans serif, but because if you like zoom in really close, it has like little like crayon-esque marks. So I would actually call it, it's like sans serif and decorative. Some of them have both. But yes, it is Comic Sans. And does anyone know why Comic Sans is famous? No?
Doesn't look good.
Yes, it doesn't look good.
Unprofessional.
Yes, very unprofessional. And the next slide, please. So, oh, go back. So, now that we've gone over, go back. No. Now that we've gone over fonts, we can talk about font pairing. So font pairing, in the first section of the slide, you never compare font, never have the same font, so, or like the same looking font. So in that first slide, you have Georgia, which is a sans serif font, but then you have Times New Roman under it. And the reason that we never combine 2 similar fonts is because it looks like you kind of just went into the drop-down menu and you chose a sans serif font and you didn't pay attention to which font that it was actually. So it's kind of like, oh, that designer was kind of lazy. So we never want to do that. But what we do want to do is use, I would say use 2 or 3 max fonts. And when you're choosing the font, you want to make sure that they have contrast. So for the top one, the use fewer fonts font, that's bold, and also when you have typography, you do want to make sure that they're contrasting, so all caps, and then the to keep the harmony is all lowercase and it's in cursive. And then on the next slide, we're just going over opposites attract, and often when you look at when you put fonts together, they come in font families. So this font right here on the slide is actually the same font, if you can see. And the good thing about font families is that they come in all different like styles, like, you know, like bold, italic, thin, extra thin. So I think the body is like thin or like a script font and then sans serif font, you might just want to stick within that font family that's already provided for you. Okay, next slide. We are gonna watch a little short. Next slide. We are gonna watch a little short on another font that you should never use. Okay.
Again, like just the major takeaway from that video is not so much like the content, but just like you guys understand that Papyrus and CMYK sans are not good fonts to be using.
Cool. Okay, now we're going to talk about some useful tools that you can use in graphic design. And these are things that may seem small or minimal, but when you're using them correctly, they will really help the look of what you're working on. So first off is leading. And leading is just basically the space between rows of text. You would probably know these as single spacing and double spacing. Like the first example is an example of single spacing. It's very squished and kind of hard to read, so we don't use it very often when we're doing graphic design. And this is contrasted with the second example, which is a double spaced text, and this is generally better for design. As you can see, it's like easier to read. Each row is individual, it's like spaced more, and so you can see each row better. And you can make the spacing bigger or the spacing smaller. And yeah, if you're working on like a Google Doc or like any Google platform, I believe you can do custom spacing in the drop-down menu, and you can probably also do that on other apps as well. So next off is margins and spacing. This is sort of similar to leading, but now we're talking about the space around the border of your project, which is what we call margins, and or around a photo or a design that you can add. And the goal of having like a good margin or a good margin spacing is to create flow and to guide the viewer through your piece. And so this is a list of the rules that you should keep in mind when you're working with margin and spacing. Top and bottom margins should be the same, side margins should be the same, and sometimes the top and bottom margins are larger than the side margins. And if we look at the next slide, this is an example of how you would use borders and margins with a photo. You can probably tell where you put text and where you don't. And like I said before, this will allow you to create flow throughout what you're making or like what your piece is. And you can also use these rules for placing photos next to each other and other stuff like that. And these two graphic design tools, leading and margins, they're pretty basic, and there are many other ones as well, but they're a lot harder to work with, so we're just going to use these two for now. And now we're going to talk about color. And Amy.
Okay, so when we think about color, the first thing you think about is the color wheel. So you've probably learned about this in school or in art class. The color wheel is just basically the wheel of colors, and each one kind of, like the ones that are close to each other, they kind of blend into each other. And then on the next slide, we'll explain some, so what hue, saturation, and value are. They're really important when we're doing like digital art, because those are a lot of the like values that determine hex codes, which I'll explain later. So hues are basically what color it is. So do I want a yellow? Do I want an orange? Do I want a green? Do I want a purple? And then saturation is basically how much gray is in the thing, or how bright or dark it is. So do I want a deep red, or do I want a really bright red? That's saturation. Value is not really in color, it's more of like a black and white scale. So it's basically from black to white and all the gray in between. On the next slide, we have color harmonies. So opposite on the complementary colors are basically opposite. That's probably one that you've learned in art class. So like red and green, purple and orange or yellow, and blue and red are kind of blue and purple are kind of like orange and yellow. Those are kind of the opposites. Analogous are the colors that are right next to each other. So basically, if you want 3 shades of purple, they're basically analogous, or like darker, lighter shades of purple. And then we have triad, which is just like 3 kind of equally distanced from each other. Split complementary is basically complementary, but instead of taking the direct opposite, you take the analogous colors and then remove the complementary. So kind of like analogous and split complementary together. Tetradic is basically 4 equally distanced colors from each other. And that's usually like the 4 colors that you commonly see, like red, green, purple, and I would say like orange, yellow. And then monochromatic is basically talking about saturation, basically how dark, how bright of that same color that you want it to be. And then the next slide, can someone tell me what color harmonies or colors are in this poster? Anyone? Okay.
Always, if you don't want to talk, you can also send it in the chat.
Yes. So the color, Riley, yes, there are complementary colors. So there's that yellow from just like overall in the poster. And then Violet has that Violet has that purple sphere. And then there's also the blue eyes. I don't know what the Iceman is called, but like that's blue. So that is complementary. What's his name? Frozen?
Frozone.
Frozone. Okay. And then there's a lot of yellows and oranges and reds. So what does that sound like? So I can give you the basic. There's complementary, there's analogous, there's analogous, which is close to each other. The 3 that are close to each other, there's complementary. Right. It is analogous, Jolie. On the next slide, we can see, this is another example of analogous. There's a lot of oranges and greens and yellows. On the next slide, there is complementary. So this is from the movie Amelie, and it has a lot of greens and reds throughout the movie because it brings out Amelie. So like in this on the in bed, everything is red, and she is actually green. So then she really pops out. On the next slide, we will find out how you can create color palettes. So we'll go over this more when we go into breakout rooms, but the first link is you can basically just choose a color, and it'll be like analogous or complementary or whatever you want, and it will help you pick from that. I really like colors.co/generate. That basically you press like the space bar and it'll give you an automatic color palette. And then you can also change it and shift it however you like. Pigment.shapefactory.co is a new one that I found out, and it's basically you can determine the saturation, the lighting, and the hue. So that's kind of the color palettes that we're seeing. Now I'm going to pass it off to Selena, who can talk about style guides and what they are.
Yeah, so once we're done talking about or learning about the style guide, we're actually going to do an activity where you're going to make your own style guide. But first, what is a style guide? So created for a company. Whenever someone needs to make a graphic or make a presentation, or like make merch like t-shirts, they can reference the style guide to make those. We like people who don't usually do graphic design, and yeah, the purpose of the style guide is to be consistent with how you present your company. This is what we call branding, and it makes it easier to be recognized, and when clients or consumers see your logo or your website, they'll be more familiar with it, so they'll probably be more receptive to you. And if we go to the next slide, this is an example of a very basic style guide. As you can see, there are many different aspects to the style guide, and we'll go over all of those in a few minutes. So what you need in a style guide, one of the first things you need to think about when it comes to the style guide is a color palette. If you want to be consistent with everything you design, even the color has to be specific to the smallest, down to the smallest value. And yeah, so we already went over color theory with Amy and what colors work well together. So we're going to get a little technical. If you look at the color palette on the screen, you'll probably see a string of numbers and letters beginning with a hashtag. These are called hexadecimal color codes, and you don't have to remember the name, but they are specific to each color, and this is usually this is what we usually use to identify colors. Yeah, so you can use this code when specifying the color on your style guide, but there are also two other types of values that are also pretty useful. If you look underneath the color palette, there is a CMYK and an RGB value, and we'll go over what they are on the next slide. But basically the RGB code is made up of 3 numbers, each value being from 0 to 255, and the CMYK code is made up of 4 numbers, and each of them represent the percent of color used. So RGB and CMYK are both, back a slide. Yeah, are both color modes, like color modes for mixing colors digitally. The easiest way to explain it would be that RGB is the mode for like digital display if you want to make something digital, and CMYK is good for printing things, like if you want to print out a poster or something. And RGB is additive mixing, and what this means is that you start on a black screen and color is added through colored light. For CMYK, you'll be starting on a white background and color is layered over it. And that would mean it's like subtracting from the white space. And that's why CMYK is called subtractive mixing. And then so when you're doing a digital poster design, you'd be using RGB. And if you're using, you're printing a brochure or something like that, you'd be using CMYK. So next thing that you would probably need, next thing after color palettes should be instructions on fonts. Basically, you want to give instructions on what font color to use with which font, and sometimes what sizes the font should be, or what sizes the text should be. And you would, in the style guide, definitely want to include some examples. At like maybe an article or like a blog post, but you can include examples of like others as well. And just FYI, this is the font April Fat Face. Stationery design, this would be things like business cards, a presentation, maybe a poster, and this would be useful for example, when you need a bunch of business cards for a lot of people, you can create a business card template and then just ask them to fill in their names. And you definitely also make sure to follow your color palette and your font usage rules. Instructions for how to use your company logo. And this would usually be the most important part because your logo is likely the element of your designs that people see and recognize the most. As you can see, this is a logo guide for a company called Umbro. So next slide, you'll see a list of what you need for your style guide, and you can reference this when you're making your own. And yeah, and just to recap that the purpose of your style guide is to help your company maintain consistent designs and styles.